Several disturbing images of members.
Peace. God bless you. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past 3 weeks, we've seen several disturbing images of members of the media facing repeated forms of abuse. They've been subject to slander slogans hung from vehicles, forms of physical and verbal intimidation, and constant heckles and jeers from protesters and occupiers. While reporting the blockade in Surrey, BC, at the border crossing, a camera crew swarmed with protesters who had to be escorted out of the area by police. In Edmonton, a media outlet felt it necessary to remove the company branding from one of their vehicles out of fear of safety of its employees. Media crews right here in Ottawa, the capital of our nation, had to hire security in order to cover events right out front of this building. Mr. Speaker, this is unacceptable. In a democratic and free society, the role of the media and freedom of press to be able to report without intimidation is essential. I would like to take this opportunity to recognize and thank all journalists, camera crews, and members of the media who have covered the front lines of this event for the past few days. The importance of your work can often go unrecognized, but it is essential to our society, and we thank you.
Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the members of the Bloc Québécois, I would like to recognize the absolutely extraordinary work of the employees of Parliament over the past few days as this House has sat in extraordinary circumstances. While the police forces in the streets were bringing the siege on the Hill to an end, women and men here were working tirelessly to allow us to debate the confirmation of the Emergencies Act. From the cafeteria staff to maintenance to the sergeant-at-arms team, to the entire clerks team, to the security guards, everyone was here despite the turmoil of the last few days, and that is simply admirable, Mr. Speaker. I want to especially highlight the tremendous work of the interpreters as we debated 16 hours a day this weekend. Again, absolutely admirable. I wish you some quiet and some rest. Congratulations and thank you all again. The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, I am honored to rise in the House today virtually to recognize the achievements of our athletes from our region. The cross-country ski team at the Olympic Games came from you to win. Congratulations, Catherine, Stuart Jones, Antoine Seal, and Laura Leclerc for your excellent performances in the Olympics in 2022. You inspire us. Nigeria is a very difficult time, we know that. Your role model, determination, resilience, and perseverance. You are truly inspiring young athletes in our region. So Catherine, Antoine, and Laura, congratulations once again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, February 22nd is Canada's National Human Trafficking Awareness Day, thanks to the hard work of the All-Party Parliamentary Group to End Human Trafficking and Modern-Day Slavery. Human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery that turns people into objects to be used and exploited. It's profitable, vicious, and it's growing, and it's happening right here in our own country and around the globe. In Canada, the vast majority of human trafficking victims are women and girls born right here, and many of them are Indigenous. Globally, more than 40 million people are currently enslaved. To the victims and survivors of human trafficking, you're not invisible. We see you. And we will steadfastly continue the fight against human trafficking, both in Canada and around the world. To my honourable colleagues and all Canadians, on February 22nd, take a moment to 1. Learn about human trafficking. 2. Raise awareness in your communities. 3. Support survivor-led organizations. Get involved and create the change. Together, we can end human trafficking. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow is Human Trafficking Awareness Day, as my colleague has just said. Human trafficking is a form of modern slavery that turns people into objects to be used and exploited. In Canada, human trafficking takes on many forms, including sex trafficking, forced labor, forced marriages, organ trafficking, and cyber sex trafficking. 93% of the victims are Canadian, 97% women and children, 50% Indigenous. Slavery is used in many of the products Canada imports. Human trafficking is vicious, it's profitable, and it's growing. It's time to end human trafficking. There are 4 things you can do on February 22nd and every day thereafter. 1, learn about it. 2, tell others. 3, support anti-trafficking organizations. And 4, get involved politically. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Brampton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. James William Roman escaped slavery in Maryland and came to Canada via the Underground Railroad. His grandson, Dr. Charles Lightfoot Roman, was born on May 19, 1889 in Port Elgin, Ontario. Dr. Roman was one of the first Black Canadians to graduate from McGill University Faculty of Medicine. He was also one of the first Black Canadians to enlist for service in First World War. Moreover, he was a surgeon, author, researcher, lecturer, and a recognized expert in industrial medicine. To this day, Dr. Roman's grandson fondly recalls how his grandparents impacted the lives of Canadians in times prior to universal healthcare. They were a heroic team of doctor and nurse whose back door was never closed to those in need, because their kitchen served double duty as a public clinic. Let us always be thankful for the many contributions of Black Canadians to our great country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Huron-Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are more divided than ever before. But one topic all Canadians can agree on is the cost of living. Every visit to the grocery store, every time you fill up your vehicle, or you get your home heating bill, Canadians are reminded of the Prime Minister's inflationary monetary policy. Inflation was 4.8% in December, 5.1% in January, and many economists say the true cost of inflation is over 10%. Housing costs have doubled, rent is unaffordable, and in some cases, used cars are now worth more than new cars. Who would ever thought? Seniors, working families, rural Canadians, urban Canadians are all stretched to the max. Mr. Speaker, it's time for the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister to get their heads out of the Davos clouds and start listening to Canadians. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow Canadians across the country will raise their flags in honor of the great women and men who deliver the very best food on the planet.
Canada's Agriculture Day is an opportunity for all of us to thank Canadian farmers and food processors who work tirelessly to provide food products in their kitchens every day.
Canada's hard-working farmers and food processors are the backbone of our economy, especially in our rural communities, and we are grateful for their dedication and hard work. So tomorrow, let's celebrate Canada's Agricultural Day. Célébrons la journée de l'agriculture du Québec.
Let's celebrate Canada's Agriculture Day.
Our food processors mean so much to us, to our families, to our communities, and to our country. Let's raise a flag for the food we love and the people who produce it. Yes, we can try this out.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to represent a variety of Hollywood food, which has been a refuge for so many seeking freedom from before the early days of Confederation. In 1793, patrol the streets here in Ottawa without excessive force and with respect for the citizens who wanted to be heard. The balance between freedom of speech is founded on democracy. Let's not take it for granted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada is closing the 2022 Olympic Winter Games in 4th position as the most decorated country with a total of 26 medals.
Team Canada's athletes presented extraordinary performances, making our country shine internationally. What an amazing team. Nous pouvons être particulièrement.
We can be particularly proud of our Quebec athletes who excelled and brought home 13 medals. In snowboard, Max Perrault and Elliott Blondet. In freestyle, Michael Kingsbury, Manon Thénault, Mia Fontaine, and Louis Irving. In speed skating, Valérie Maltais, Kim Boutin, Steven Dubois, Charles Hamelin, Pascal Dion, and Jordan Pierre-Gilles. In women's field hockey, Marie-Philippe Poulin, Anne-Renée Desbiens, and Mélanie Daou. A big congratulations to Team Canada.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Today, this House will hold a historic vote. Years from now, many of us will reflect on this debate, the crisis that brought us here, and the profound historical impact it will have. At times, debate has been heated on both sides, but I feel the rhetoric has served no one. And we cannot understate the reasons we are here. The hate, intolerance, threats, destruction, and intimidation that have left their lives thus far. Canadians have been left shocked and traumatized. Today's vote will happen. Tomorrow, the words will remain. We all have an obligation to fix our political system that is failing Canadians. Representations of Canadians fear for their freedoms back. We must truly address climate change so parents can see that they are not bridging their futures. We must work with the schools and pay workers so they can have a living wage. We must build affordable housing and secure it as a human right. We own this country, so let's fix it and leave it in a better state for future generations. We owe Canadians that much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 25 days after the arrival of the first trucks of the occupant convoy, the streets of Ottawa are finally free. This is thanks to the exceptionally well-coordinated work of 7 police forces, including the Sûreté du Québec. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I would like to thank all officers who participated in ending the siege of Ottawa and putting it down. Their professionalism and patience were impressive. Just 3 days ago, it seemed almost impossible to imagine a peaceful resolution to this occupation. Yet this is what literally materialized before our eyes as we watched the operation from our office windows. In closing, I would like to specifically acknowledge the impeccable work of the Parliamentary Protective Service, which allowed members of Parliament to continue to work safely in the name of democracy despite what could have been dangerous circumstances. Thank you to all of you for your professionalism and for your service.
The honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, in 1970, Tommy Douglas took a stand against government overreach. He courageously opposed the use of the War Measures Act by Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And yet, where is that courageous and historical NDP today? They were standing up for the son of Pierre Trudeau, giving him extraordinary powers to freeze bank accounts of political dissidents without due process, Mr. Speaker. Where the liberal inspired and balancing minorities in the public service, the NDP did not stand up for them. Where the Liberals enacted policies at the border that cost blue-collar workers their jobs, the NDP did not stand up for them. When those marginalized and traumatized by government mandates and restrictions mobilized into the largest pan-Canadian demonstration ever seen, the NDP did not stand up for them. I call my NDP colleagues today to use the rare and extraordinary power they possess in determining the vote on the Emergencies Act tonight to stand against giving liberals that I call on them to stand up for workers. I call on them to stand up for their right rights. I call on them to stand up for every Canadian vote no, Mr. Speaker.
distressed by what he saw, the loss of Métis traditional lands, and called for action. À l'âge de 25,
At the age of 25, Adel formed a provisional government and presented Canada with a Bill of Rights.
on May 12, 1870, the bill became the Manitoba Act. 151 years later, on July 6, 2021, I was witness to the Government of Canada and the Manitoba Métis Federation signing the Manitoba Métis Self-Government Recognition and Implementation Agreement, an historic step in the renewal of the nation-to-nation principle and recognition of the Manitoba Métis Federation as an Indigenous government. Let's reflect, let's celebrate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Foreign questions, question orale. Official opposition.
Conservatives, along with others, don't believe the Emergency Act was necessary to clear the protests and blockades. Many experts, including people like Chris Lewis, former commissioner of the OPP, are saying the government had all the tools they needed and the Emergencies Act was an overreach. The Prime Minister reported this morning that Ottawa is clear, the trucks are gone and the borders are open, but he says an emergency remains. Can the Prime Minister tell us what is the criteria for this emergency to be declared over, and on what date will he end these unprecedented and invasive measures?
The Emergencies Act is enabling critical measures to end these illegal blockades and prevent further occupations. We've heard from police chiefs, security experts, and municipal and provincial leadership that it has been essential to the response. We've been very clear that these measures will apply only when and where necessary, and again, these tools are to supplement local capacity, not negate or override it. As soon as these measures are no longer required, we will gladly lift them. This is responsible leadership. Official opposition.
Can the Prime Minister tell us exactly what powers the Emergency Act is giving him today that do not already exist? I know he said he needed the Act to force tow trucks to tow trucks away, but as he's already said, the trucks are gone, so we don't need tow trucks any longer. What power is needed right now, today, under the Emergency Act that doesn't already exist under current Canadian law?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
After weeks of people being harassed in their neighborhoods and seeing small businesses forced to close, after billions of dollars were spent on trade putting people's livelihoods at risk, after evidence of increased ideologically motivated violent extremism activity across the country, and after a flood of misinformation and disinformation washed over Canada, including from foreign sources, it became clear that local and provincial authorities needed more tools to restore order and keep people safe. I ask all members of Parliament to stand up for Canada this evening.
Prime Minister talked earlier today about moving fences. He called on Canadians to call their unvaccinated present and for Canadians to aim for more decency in our public discourse. I would like to ask the Prime Minister if he would be willing to lead by example and apologize to Canadians that he called racist and misogynist and with unacceptable views because he disagreed with them. I think it would go a long way, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister rise today and would he lead the way?
The right of Canadians to express their opinions, the right of Canadians to protest peacefully, to disagree with their governments is something we will always stand up to protect and withhold, even uphold, even with the implementation of the Emergencies Act. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms continues to apply. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, continuing to demonstrate the way Canadians are being there for each other, not harming their neighbors, not occupying cities, but being there for frontline workers, being there to support each other. That has been the story of this blockade and this pandemic.
The Honourable from Métis-Carable.
Mr. Speaker,
The member for Beaches
confirmed this morning in this House that I'm not convinced that the Emergencies Act should be in place, and that after today, I will vote for it, but not because it's a confidence vote. Is it true that you've called for a confidence vote? Will you start an election if they don't vote for it? The Right Honorable Prime Minister, the Emergencies Act allows us to take essential measures to end the illegal blockades and to prevent the occupation from starting again. Security experts, police forces, and officials have told us that this act is essential. They've clearly said that these measures will only be applied as necessary. These are tools that are in addition to local capacity, and we will cancel these measures as soon as necessary. Thank you. Well, from my closing about many words, Mr. Speaker. I've listened to the Prime Minister carefully, but it's not enough to tell Canadians to talk to each other. The Prime Minister himself has to set the example. He listened to Canadians who do not think like him. Did he take time to call them before he in terms of these emergency measures? Will we recall each of the citizens that he insulted in the past weeks? It's time for the Prime Minister to walk the talk. The Right Honorable Prime Minister, since the beginning of this pandemic, this government, like most Canadians, have been there for each other. We supported each other during difficult times. We were there for small companies and for seniors and for our frontline workers. And this will be the history of our pandemic. It won't be the history of people who are blocking streets and preventing people, other Canadians, from doing their jobs and from living in peace. It will be the history of people who are there for each other. And it is these people that we will continue to work with for the future. The wonderful Belle Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More than 2 weeks ago, the City of Ottawa asked for 1,800 RCMP officers so they could adequately resolve this crisis. Last week, they showed that this was actually the correct solution. But even more than 2 weeks ago, I hope the Prime Minister considered the Emergencies Act. But since he didn't revoke it every time there was a protest, I hope he will resist that temptation. But can he now renounce to the use of the Emergencies Act? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that we are still in a precarious situation across the country. We're happy to have seen the work that our police forces did over the past weekend here in Ottawa and Gatineau to ensure everyone's safety in the National Capital Region. We've also seen interventions across the country to prevent other convoys from going to places where there are blockades that could be formed. We're going to remain vigilant, but of course, we're all looking forward to noting the end of these emergency measures, and we will be evaluating the situation every day. The Honourable Member for Belle Chambly. I would ask the Prime Minister to identify at least one place in Canada or Quebec that justifies the existence of this act right now. He talked about tow trucks and financing and freezing bank accounts, not for 2 weeks. Well, let's make legislation for 2 weeks, not permanently, if there's criminal actions done with criminal funding. He wants this to be a confidence vote because he's fearing his own caucus carrying out and that is not the right means to go about this. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I appreciate enormously the commitment of the government in terms of emergency additional measures that we could debate in this Parliament once the emergency state is over, to ensure that our police forces and authorities do have all the necessary tools so that they can deal with illegal occupation or criminal acts such as this one. For the time being, we're still in an emergency situation, and I know, like all Canadians, we're looking forward to end these emergency measures as soon as necessary, and we will continue to monitor the situation closely. Thank you.
Member for Burnaby South.
The occupation in Ottawa and the blockades on bridges and borders across Canada has had a severe impact on workers. We know workers in Windsor, auto sector workers, workers in the downtown core of Ottawa and the Rideau Centre and others were severely impacted. They lost days, in some cases weeks of wages. That made it even harder for them to put food on the table. The government's announced a plan to support small businesses, but not a plan for workers. Where is the plan to support the workers that have been impacted by the occupation and the blockades?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Leader of the NDP for his support of workers, and I agree with him on that. We've continued every step of the way through the difficult past 2 years. We've had to be there for small businesses, for seniors, for young people, for workers. We will continue to do that. We recognize that on top of the pandemic context, these occupations and blockades have been extremely difficult on businesses and workers, and we're moving forward with measures to support them. This is something I think we can all agree on in this house, to be there for Canadians.
Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
The occupation in Ottawa and the border shutdowns have hit workers very hard. It is increasingly difficult for them to make ends meet. The Liberal government announced a plan for small businesses that are affected by the occupation and the blockades, but nothing for workers. Where is the plan to help workers impacted by the occupation in Ottawa and the workers across the country? Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the leader of the NDP for his commitment to workers, and we share his concerns. And that is why, for the past 2 years, we've implemented a list of measures to support workers, small businesses, seniors, and families struggling because of this pandemic. And that is why we're committed to be there for people who need our help because of the occupation of Ottawa. Yes, we put forward a program for small businesses, and we're going to continue to take care of workers as well.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal member for Beaches East York said today in the House, quote, I'm not convinced the emergency measures could extend. I'm not convinced the emergency measures should extend beyond today, he said. I would vote accordingly, but it's now a confidence vote. It would seem that the Prime Minister is strong-arming his backbench and the NDP to vote in his favour by threatening an election, Mr. Speaker. Isn't that true?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think that we all breathe a sigh of relief at the phenomenal work that is done by law enforcement during peace and silence. I look forward to the vote that's going to be taking place in just a few hours to have this House affirm the powers that were needed to ensure that peace and stability, and to make sure on a preventative basis that we do not see a return to that level of support.
Mr. Speaker, the blockades have ended. Downtown Ottawa has been cleared. If there was ever a national emergency, which remains in doubt, it's over. So there is no need for the Emergencies Act vote tonight, but it would seem then that this vote tonight is about far more than the blockades and the protesters in downtown Ottawa. It would seem it's only about power. The government having the power and setting the precedent for bank accounts and political dissidents can be frozen. Isn't that great, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, I want to just highlight how instrumental the Emergencies Act has been to address the right thing that is consistent with the Charter, the illegal blockades. And I too want to take a moment to express my profound gratitude. I hope all members of the Chamber will say thank you to the RCMP and all members of the law enforcement who, in a very professional, measured, and restrained manner, have restored order to the streets of Ottawa and have ensured that we've made progress at our borders. Mr. Speaker, we will only use the powers of the Emergencies Act as long as necessary.
Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, over the past week, we've heard that Canada didn't need emergency measures to resolve the issue in Ottawa. Thousands of police across Canada were able to solve the situation. This is the first time this has happened. However, continuing to oppose the Emergencies Act, which doesn't have its place in my opinion, is not necessary. The Ambassador Bridge was cleared without this act. Why is the Prime Minister insisting on invoking an emergency act that Canadians don't want? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. For the past days, we've seen the blockades have been lifted at our borders and in the downtown Ottawa area. I'd like to thank all of the law enforcement officers for their professionalism. The Emergencies Act was key, but we'd like to end it as quickly as possible. Mr. Speaker, in my hometown of Quebec City, demonstrations took place without the emergency legislation. What was lacking clearly in Ottawa in recent weeks was leadership. The Premier of Quebec does not want the Emergencies Act, neither do 7 other premiers, but they are imposing this extreme act. Why does the government insist on keeping these measures, even though the premiers don't want it? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to reassure to my colleague and all members of this House that all of the measures in the Emergencies Act were used in consultation with all the authorities in provinces and municipalities. We're going to continue to work together with the provinces and territories, with advice from police forces, as long as this act is necessary, but we will withdraw it as quickly as possible.
For Wellington, Halton Hills. Mr. Speaker, has the government received a legal opinion from either the Attorney General or the Department of Justice whether the emergency powers granted under the Emergencies Act, particularly the power to freeze financial accounts, are consistent with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and if so, will the government release the legal opinion to the House before this evening's vote?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for his question. I am confident as Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, that we have met the standard to apply the Emergencies Act, and as we have stated on many occasions, Mr. Speaker, we are required as a government that any measures that we take will conform with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, including Section 8 rights and search and seizure.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Mr. Speaker, my question is from the Justice Minister and the Finance Minister. First, how many bank accounts have been frozen under authority of the emergency proclamation? Second, will the government commit that no further funds will be frozen without a court order verifying the rational connection exists between the funds and the unlawful blockades? And third, will the currently frozen accounts for which a rational connection has not been demonstrated be released forthwith?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Well, I want to thank my colleague for the many questions, but I will say at the very beginning that the RCMP had clarified that at no time they provided any list of donors to banks for enforcement under the Emergencies Act, Mr. Speaker. And with regards to those financial controls which are being exercised under the Act, Mr. Speaker, as we've said many times, those powers are being exercised in a manner that is consistent with the Charter, including due process rights, as well as the right to be protected against any unreasonable search and seizure. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the occupation of Ottawa is over. There are no trucks left in the streets. The protesters have left. The police are control of the situation and normal life is resuming. And yet tonight the House will vote on the implementation of the Emergencies Act to address what the government wrongly calls a national crisis. Not only has there never been a national crisis, but there's no longer a crisis at all. Will the Prime Minister immediately rescind his declaration of a state of crisis? The Honourable Minister, Mr. Speaker, we have seen progress against illegal blockades, but threats still exist. The Emergencies Act will be key in terms of ending illegal blockades. We received advice from experts, and and police officials that have said this act is still necessary. The Honourable Member for Avignon-Lamentis-Matane. Mr. Speaker, this is completely absurd. The Prime Minister wants us to vote for extraordinary measures to get no trucks and no protesters off the streets in Ottawa. And yet if we oppose it, he'll make it a no confidence vote. So he can call a second unnecessary election in 6 months. Or worse than that, what he is demanding means that for the first time in history, the House of Commons would support the Use of Emergencies Act to deal with a problem that no longer exists. Does the Prime Minister realize how low a bar he is setting and how damaging a precedent he is setting? The Honourable Minister, Mr. Speaker, with all due respect for my colleague, despite the progress that has been made, there are still risks. Risks in Ottawa, in front of the House of Commons, at our borders. There are a lot of efforts to keep illegal blockades from resuming, and that is why, in the opinion of police forces, we will continue to keep the Emergencies Act for now, and will use these measures with great responsibility, with all the respect due to the Charter. The Honourable for Avignon-Lamentis-Matane. Mr. Speaker, still absurd. Dozens of trucks who have left Ottawa have threatened that as soon as they can, they will return. So how long will the Prime Minister keep these emergency measures in place? Will he leave them in place forever, even if there's no crisis, just in case the trucks come back? Seriously, Mr. Speaker, what is it going to take for the government to realize that the Emergencies Act did not solve this crisis? It was a well-considered police intervention, like we've been asking for since the beginning. The Honourable Minister, Mr. Speaker, legislation is working on the measures that were in the Act are temporary and targeted, and they're going to be used in respect of the Charter. And they'll be removed as quickly as possible. At the same time, we have to listen to the advice of our police forces.
Blandon Kent Nielsen's.
Speaker, the Finance Minister said at a press conference this morning, and I quote, "For anyone who is concerned that their accounts may have been frozen because of their participation in the illegal blockade or occupation, the way to get your account unfrozen is to stop being part of the blockades and occupation." Well, the blockades have ended, but concerns over frozen accounts has not. Speaker, what mechanisms are in place today to help those who are accidentally caught in the government dragnet?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, to be very, very clear, the RCMP issued a statement today that clearly and unequivocally stated that they have not released the names of donors to the banks and that they are doing their job of targeting those individuals who are primarily responsible for that, including the people who park their trucks illegally on the streets. Mr. Speaker, for any individual, any Canadian who happens to have their accounts frozen by the bank, they should call their bank and find out why.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf, Jacques Cartier. Mr. Speaker, the Emergencies Act allows for bank accounts to be frozen. Many Canadians have told us that they don't know the rules or how long they will last. We must not trivialize this law. It is very worrisome. And even worse, the Minister of Finance wants to introduce legislation to give more power to the banks without a mandate. Can the Minister commit to establishing mechanisms for abusive decisions to help innocent Canadian citizens? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to remind the member, first of all, there is nothing retroactive in the measures we brought forward. They take effect on February 15th. So anyone who, for example, made a donation to a cause prior to that wouldn't in any way be impacted by these measures. Additionally, there is built right into the Emergency Act parliamentary scrutiny and subject to scrutiny by this House, Mr. Speaker, and by the other place. And so the concerns the member that brings forward can be addressed quite appropriately within the existing Act.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Speaker, a financial financial crime expert says the Emergencies Act is a, quote, serious deviation from normal democratic process. A U of T finance professor says banks may be inclined to overreact so as to not run afoul of government. Security and finance experts say there are no suspicious activities or credible threats with protest-related donations. There's no evidence, court order, or due process, and no limits on what direct or indirect participation means. It's already happening to my constituents. So when will frozen bank accounts be up and running again?
The Honourable Minister of Emergency Preparedness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Integrated Command Team, which is composed of the Ottawa Police Service, the OPP, and the RCMP, have been clear and unequivocal. The authorities that have been provided to them under the Emergency Act have been essential to the progress that they have made in getting the situation under control. And Mr. Speaker, we've also heard from the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, that's all the chiefs, the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, and even the Canadian Police Association representing the rank and file, all have been clear and unequivocal. These measures were essential and have been helping them restore order in this country.
The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, while some MPs are claiming that the threats are now over, Canadians are still living with the impacts of the ongoing convoy crisis. In BC, the Pacific Highway crossing had to be preemptively closed this weekend, blocking commuters, essential workers, and goods. The RCMP arrested 16 people, while other unlawful activity could not be addressed on the spot due to lack of resources. After weeks of failed leadership from the government, will the minister assure Canadians that they are now acting with the urgency needed?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Well, I want to thank my colleague for highlighting one of the ongoing risks that we face, which is a threat to our borders, our trade corridors, which are so critically important to keeping Canadians at work and our economy rolling, Mr. Speaker. That's why we continue to listen very carefully to the advice that we're getting from our police services, who say that this Emergencies Act is instrumental in having addressed the blockades at ports of entry and continues to be instrumental in preventing them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, what happened in Coutts, Alberta is unprecedented. Conservatives are downplaying the severity of what is happening and are pretending that the threat is over. There was a plot to murder RCMP officers by dangerous extremists. Millions of dollars are still coming in from foreign sources to fund these hate groups.
Order. I've got the volume as far up as I can, so I'm not hearing the question, so we're going to keep a relative roar when we're asking the question. The member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, what happened in Coutts, Alberta is unprecedented, and conservatives in this House are downplaying the severity of what is happening and are pretending that the threat is over. There was a plot to murder RCMP officers by dangerous extremists. Millions of dollars are still coming in from foreign sources to fund these hate groups. When will the government bring forward legislation to hold all...
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I do share the concerns of my honourable colleague around the severity of the charges that were laid in Coutts, including conspiracy to commit murder. Of course, Mr. Speaker, honourable colleagues will recognize that it would be inappropriate for us to comment on ongoing matters which are now before the courts, but I also share her concern around the rhetoric and extremism which we have seen not only in Alberta but right across the country, which has motivated some of the individuals. Mr. Speaker, we need to be vigilant about that. We need to be sure that we deal with those threats, Mr. Speaker. That's one of the reasons why the Emergencies Act is there to help protect the health and safety of Canadians. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, the last 3 weeks have been extraordinarily difficult for the people of Ottawa. Major roads blocked, noise at all hours of the night, people threatened and intimidated in their own communities. Despite the severe economic impacts of the last 2 years, downtown businesses were forced to shut their doors yet again. This past weekend, we saw police execute a coordinated plan that finally removed demonstrators and their vehicles from Ottawa streets. This only came after the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act for the very first time in our nation's history. Can the Minister of Emergency Preparedness explain to this House why the act